Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here virtually with you. Call me, Lord, as you called the Take me on a journey, letting
Shame for the
mistakes are erased, and I'm free to move at my own pace. Isn't that grace? Isn't that grace? You let me see your face even after I pushed you away. It's good to do worship with y'all this morning. I'm on the end of a cold, so thank you for bearing with my coughing fits.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Pride. Good morning. Great job, Brackett. I saw a Twitter essay this week by a non-binary person of faith, and it's been in my thoughts a bunch lately. It's actually what I want to pray about this morning. In this Twitter essay, the person was refuting the biblical passage that says God created man and women. That basically some people use to hold up the idea of a gender binary. In the same passage, the biblical author says that God created the day and the night, the sea and the sky, many examples of binaries, basically. But this person on Twitter said, okay, so God also created sunsets. Is that day or night? And if there are fish in the sea and birds in the sky, what's a penguin? God created all of these things, and God's creation is without boundaries, without binaries, and it cannot and should not be limited by our narrow human understanding. So, God, thank you for being with us today. You are truly the God of more than we hope, more than we expect, more than we fear, more than we know. I pray that everyone this morning finds God in places we don't anticipate, and that we allow the breadth of your miraculous creation to include us, even and especially when we don't think it should. May the God of more bless us all and stay with us today and always. Amen.
Amen. What a wonderful reflection on our Genesis creation story. Thank you, Rebecca, and happy Pride indeed to all who are celebrating here in June. We're so glad to be with you all today. The Brackets, as mentioned, are on the end of colds, so it's nice that we're together virtually, in particular this Sunday, so we're not spreading our germs to you. It does remind me of like a year ago this time, anytime somebody would cough, like, when there was no vaccines out there, you go, not COVID, promise. So we're in the clear though today. So glad everybody is with us. My name is Vince Brackett. I am one of the pastors here at Brown Line Church, and we do hope that in the worship, in the prayer, in the music, and then in our discussion today, you feel really connected with God, and you feel really connected with yourself, and you feel really connected with the world around you as you're with us for the next hour or so. Quick shout outs here for making today's service possible, to Trey Fratt for running our visuals so we can follow along with lyrics today. Thank you, Trey. You rock. To Rebecca for praying for us, to getting us going this morning. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And then also to Abby Dye, who is our moderator for today, making sure that we have everything we need in the chat. We'll hear more from Abby in a little bit, but at least to get us started, Abby, if you're there, if we want to participate today in the chat, that's available to us. What could you get us going with? Is there a prompt or a trivia question, or what do you have for us today to get us moving so we can interact with each other virtually?
Sure. Yeah, just one. It's a simple one, but what is something that you're most looking forward to doing this summer?
Great. Love it. Thank you, Abby. And we want to hear what it is you're looking forward to. Brown Line Church is both a local and an online community, and so we're welcoming everybody who's joining us, whether you're in Chicago or whether you're joining from beyond Chicago. We started this church to be a space for people to grow spiritually, in particular people who feel more comfortable in progressive settings or secular settings or settings with lots of perspectives rather than in religious settings where there tend to be just one perspective represented. So that tends to be many of us didn't grow up in a highly religious environment, and that's not really how we got into spirituality as a thing in our life or becoming praying people or people interested in Jesus. Maybe that's you, or maybe you're somebody who did grow up in a highly religious environment and you're actually here and feel at home here because leaving that has been very important to your spiritual growth. And so we welcome you from whatever part of that breakdown you come from. You are very welcome here, no matter where it is and what your starting point is. Our guide here is Jesus of Nazareth. And so there are religious settings that present faith in Jesus as yet another exclusive thing, yet another only this perspective will land. And if you're outside of that, you're outside of our club and you can't be saved and you can't go to heaven and you can't have all the good things that a person of faith has. But that has just never been our experience here when it comes to faith in Jesus for us. Our experience is that following Jesus, spiritual growth that's grounded in the biblical tradition, as Rebecca sort of reflected on us, even the core of the biblical tradition, the Genesis creation story, for us, it's always made us more inclusive. It's always made us more open and never more closed off. So we do hope that as you're with us today, you get an experience of that type of faith. So today we are continuing our series, God in All Things. I've really enjoyed this. Today, I want to talk in particular about imposter syndrome, and in particular, a spiritual imposter syndrome. I wonder if you guys have heard this phrase before, imposter syndrome. So it's like the persistent pattern of thinking in you that you're a fraud and you can't quite overcome it. Oh my gosh, if people knew me for real, they would know that I'm actually a fraud, that none of my accomplishments or any of the things that I talk about in life are actually make me worthy of anything. I'm a fraud. I have to thank, actually, Rebecca, who just prayed for us. I have to thank you for a meme that you posted earlier this week. I'm going to show you guys because it makes me laugh. So this is great. It's quiz. Are you even good enough to have imposter syndrome? I love this. It's imposter syndrome about having imposter syndrome. You're a fraud because you couldn't even have it in the first place. And that just, I think, really captures a lot of what people feel in general. Imposter syndrome is epidemic, I think, today. I think a lot of people suffer, in particular for our discussion today, from spiritual imposter syndrome. And that's a big thing that we wanted to try to tear down in this series, God in All Things. Before we're done today, we do hope that you hear the message loud and clear. You're not a spiritual fraud. God likes you more than you think God likes you. Those are the kind of things we want you to come away with today. I remember before I was a pastor, a friend that I worked with in a job that I held at the time, and we often talked about spiritual stuff because I was in a pastoral studies program and this friend knew that about me. She was like one of the most disciplined people I've ever met in my life. Like she, was the kind of person who got up early to exercise every single day. She was extremely on top of her diet. She was never ashamed to talk about going to therapy. Like she was somebody who really took seriously every aspect of health and was so disciplined and so on it. I was always very impressed with her. But despite that, she was convinced that she was a fraud. And I remember honest conversations, especially when we talk about spirituality. She's just convinced that there is no such thing as her feeling close to God because she's kind of convinced she's a fraud. There was no amount of things that she could do, accomplishments she could tick off or discipline that she could demonstrate that would make her stop feeling like she's kind of a fraud. And in particular in the spiritual place, dissatisfaction is what she's destined to. She could never feel close with God. That might be true for me, her friend. That might be true for somebody else, but it could not be true for her. And that is spiritual imposter syndrome right there. It is, I think most people struggle with some degree of this in their spiritual life. Oh yeah, that person I know over there could definitely be close with God or feel spiritual satisfaction in their prayer life. But not me. That's for that person over there, not me. Now, interestingly, I think the fact that it's so everywhere, I think that's proof that it isn't actually true because we can't all be frauds, right? But it's not that easy to turn off, obviously. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to invite a couple of friends in this morning from Brownline who are going to invite into this conversation to get us talking about this, to get us talking about spiritual imposter syndrome. I thought about two different kinds of backgrounds that describe people that come from our church. Sort of like when we introduce ourselves every week, we talk about how there's some people who are here because they never really grew up in a highly religious environment. And there's some people here who did grow up in a highly religious environment, and that's why they're here, because growth was leaving that behind. And so I wanted to try to grab somebody from each of those camps, loosely speaking. Obviously, all of us can only speak for ourselves, but I thought that it would help us, the most of us possible, resonate if we heard a little bit from people who kind of straddle that line there. So first, the angle I'm calling, I couldn't possibly matter to God because I actually feel really uncomfortable with Christianity. Or, I couldn't possibly matter to God because I'm not that religious. Things like that. That's going to be the first angle. And sharing with us from her unique version of that background will be teacher, covert woodworker, and a Brown Line Church pastoral care team member, Abby Dye. Hey, Abby.
Hi, what an introduction.
You are a covert woodworker, but not so covert anymore.
I kind of like that. I should put that on my LinkedIn profile that I don't use.
I think that's good. I think that's good, although not so covert in Brown Line anymore.
Yeah.
Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, well, hello. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And then second, speaking from the angle that I'm calling, I couldn't possibly be close to God because I've been told all my life that I'm not doing enough to be close to God. I'm not doing enough about my faith. Sharing with us from her unique perspective of that version is going to be recently promoted HR extraordinaire, unmatched gift giver, unmatched. Truly, some of the best gifts I've ever seen in my life have come from this person. And Brown Line Church worship leader, Elizabeth Bertrand. Hi, Elizabeth.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for that intro. Yes, I am feeling all kinds of feelings about this topic. So looking forward to getting into it.
Excellent. Yeah, me too. I'm really glad to have you too. I think that both of these individuals will offer a great deal for us. So I'm going to start with, we have a couple of questions and we're just going to kind of bat them around, and I might ask some follow-up questions to these two, just so we can kind of tease this out. Imposter syndrome spiritually from a couple of different angles. So first off, we talk a lot here at BLC about the God revealed in Jesus not being cold and distant and like off in the clouds, but rather invested, close, emotional, even like feeling things, affected by things. And the affect that we are considering today is like God feeling emotionally like interested in us, delighted in us, pleased with us. Like, oh my gosh, this person matters to me so much. That's what God is saying to God's self. And what I'm wondering, my first question often is like, what are the obstacles to that for you two? So what makes you feel like you could never matter to God? Abby, why don't we go to you first?
Sure, yes. So I actually also found that meme really funny that you shared, because when you asked about this, I was like, I don't know, like, who am I to even have spiritually like imposter syndrome? And so I found that very funny because that also resonated with me. But I think there are kind of two big obstacles for me to this, and like not doing it right is one of them, and then kind of comparison of needs and worthiness is the other one I can think of. But for like not doing it right, I think what I mean is, praying and kind of doing the whole talking to God and being spiritual thing. So kind of, all of it. But being around people who, know what to say and how to pray can sometimes make me feel needlessly self-conscious. Like I was kind of telling you this earlier, I get really sweaty when I have to pray out loud. Like, am I using the correct prayer words? What are prayer words in general? Are people just thinking about how I'm just pausing and not actually saying real things? Am I supposed to use the third person? How am I supposed to know what to pray or ask for? And half the time that's actually why I'm praying, because I really don't have any idea. And that's, I'm sort of looking for guidance. And so what do you say when you just don't know? And then there's always that like, oh no, like I didn't thank God first or pray for world peace. So maybe I'm actually selfish and this isn't going to work because like I'm trying to make it about me, but it shouldn't be about me. And there's that whole sort of back and forth that really clouds, as you can imagine, any sort of actual conversation. And, I don't really think that anyone is actually thinking any of those things when I'm praying. Like, I really, really don't think that anyone cares. And I don't think that God is thinking that either. But there's just a really powerful dissonance between, feeling and knowing. And I think we can really go in and out of that, of feeling like, well, because I don't know what to do, I couldn't matter. And even though I know like that seems a little ridiculous, it's still a thing that I feel, or a thing that happens. And then the other thing that I kind of talked about is that comparison of needs. And so like when I was, talking about like, and I didn't pray for world peace first, it's like, well, my needs aren't really that. There are so many other things that are so much more important than what I am trying to talk to God about. And so it's really easy for me to compare levels of worthiness. Like, I am really privileged and I have a good life. And so who am I to, ask God for anything when there are so many other people who are dealing with weightier things that I think like should probably be prioritized first. And it's really tricky for me because I think like if you asked me if there was any limit to God's joy or love or grace, I would say like absolutely not. There's an abundance of it. Everyone deserves it. Like point blank, like I do believe that, but it's hard for me to wrap my head around that abundance because I operate such in a human framework. Like people only have so much time and energy and care. And even though I know God is not people, I can't really understand that endless energy and love. And so I kind of go to like, well, okay, there's a priority list and I'm not at the top, and that's kind of okay because I think there are other people who should be at the top. But then what does that mean for my relationship with God? But I also, in reflecting on that, think that idea is a little bit limiting. I mean, obviously, but it also assumes that like I'm the one who knows it all and is trying to like help God delegate, which I think is also a little bit, self-centered or not quite. It's kind of a reality check a little bit as well.
That all makes so much sense. I very much resonate that. I think I kind of live in I came into being a praying person in a similar way. Abby, and you and I have talked about that before. And so I resonate with all of that so much. Elizabeth, how about you? Like when we ask this question of like, what are the obstacles to you feeling like God might have these emotional feelings toward you, being pleased with you? God thinks, oh, Elizabeth matters to me so much. What are the obstacles to that for you?
So, well, before I answer that question, so when you first asked about this topic, at first I was like, oh, this is a good topic to think about. I feel honored about talking about this. And then similar to that meme, that imposter syndrome feeling started creeping up. And I thought there's definitely someone more qualified to speak about this that has more years under their belt about, spiritual discipline. Yes, I have been a Christian or someone that has grown up in a religious setting since I was a kid, but who am I? I should have come prepared with Bible verses this morning. I don't have any. So sorry, I can't help you in that regard. But, and I guess that is an obstacle in itself. I feel like God holds me to a higher standard because I have been a Christian since I was a kid. And I should come prepared all the time with a Bible verse, with some kind of prophetic thought or dream or something of that sort that I should have come with to the table. And I don't have that. I don't even remember the last time I opened a Bible, for example, and read it. And I've always felt that so daunting. And I feel like God can't certainly meet me because I don't have the Bible memorized from cover to cover. God can't certainly see my needs because I don't remember the last time I fully got down on my knees and prayed. And so that's where my obstacle lies. as someone that has been following him all these years, I should have it all together.
Yeah, I feel this strong sense in what you're saying, Elizabeth, and Abby, in what you were sharing, of there's a matter of worthiness involved. Does that feel true? Like, and I'm wondering if we can follow that just a little bit and maybe not spend too much time on it, because we don't really want to spend time on messages that are, destroying our souls. We'd like to move on to some messages that might enlighten us a little bit. But I don't know, like, do you have a sense of, like, is there messaging, maybe implicit messaging, but just messaging nonetheless, that has really brought up this worthiness thing of, like, in order to experience God having any sort of emotional reaction to you that's positive, you have to earn it, or you have to be worthy of that. Can you source that from your childhood, or just from the things you've picked up being somebody who, walked around and did life the way you did it?
So it's interesting you say that. I remember being at a church conference once, and my hands weren't out. And the person that was praying for me said, you can't receive from God because you physically aren't putting your hands out. And the shame that I felt in that moment, I wasn't worthy of God's gift to me and what he had to give me, because I physically didn't have my hands out. And I have wrestled with that, of how to be certain times physically. Should I kneel? Should I raise my hands? Now, that's fine, that if somebody does that. And there's sometimes I want to do that too. But I don't feel that I'm any less worthy because I don't have my hands out, or I'm not postured in a certain way. But that has been so hard grained in me that even today, I have to tell myself, you are okay. You are enough where you are in this moment, hands raised, hollering or not,
I mean, it just feels like there is an understanding for most people, I think, like, looking at what faith in the God that Jesus shows humanity is supposed to be like, that you're supposed to actually, like those questions are supposed to disappear, right? Because you're supposed to feel a deep belonging, a deep worthiness, and yet there's this dissonance. And it's not so different from the dissonance that Abby was talking about before. Of course, this shouldn't be the case. She's, like you kind of, like, demonstrated, like, perfect self-talk, right? Like, this shouldn't be the case. I shouldn't feel this way. I don't actually believe this, but nonetheless, I do. There's a dissonance between what is said and what I feel, and that feels real. Just because you brought it up, Elizabeth, shame. Use the word shame. This feels like a big one for many men who I have pastored, that have been socialized in highly religious settings. And so I think a huge litmus test that I often hear for, like, how is your spiritual health, is basically, there might be kids present, so let me mask this a little bit, is how long since the last time you word ending in 8. And so, and the challenge with that is, like, I've seen so many men struggle with self-hatred. So many men who grew up in highly religious environments struggle with just, like, a stunted identity, because they cannot believe that they can possibly be anything until they get one specific thing in their life figured out. And if they don't get that figured out, then God really isn't pleased with them and can't be pleased with them, because that's the gateway. And I just, like, there have got to be less cruel alternatives in our world for, like, what does it mean for a man to grow up? And so shame is such a weapon that often implicitly is passed on to men who are socialized in highly religious spaces in America, and that does not lead to them feeling like, oh, God loves them. It leads to them feeling like, I think God probably hates me, and I kind of hate myself. So I couldn't help but not bring that up when you bring up the word shame. Abby, just kind of throwing it back your way, thinking about like, were there any messages, or implicit or explicit, that maybe caused some of that dissonance that you were talking about?
Yeah. So I grew up Catholic, but I was never particularly religious, but it always makes me laugh a little bit when like uh people refer to me as like not growing up religious, because my mom, I don't feel like I did, but my mom would be like, wait, what? Like you went to Catholic school. We went to church all the time. But I didn't ever feel it. Like I never felt religious. But I had that whole life experience of going to church in a pretty rigid environment, and rigid in terms of like you stand, you sit, you do all of the things. Like there are very much markers of like how you go through mass. And so growing up, that's what I did. I didn't really feel connected to it. But then as I was trying to find like my own spiritual community, it was really hard because I was like, I don't really believe this, but this is what I know how to do. And then when people would talk about, the Bible, I had no idea what they were talking about. Like I had to memorize the books of the Bible, the names of them in order. And I was like, that's about, and like, a couple of parables, but like, I didn't really know what people were talking about in terms of like the facts and like the order of things. Like, so I was a little bit lost in that and felt a little like, oh, well, like I shouldn't be here because everybody knows these things about God and can sort of have this language of understanding church life. And I just don't know, like I felt like I was too not like religious enough for some environments and too religious for others. And there was just not a good fit in terms of somewhere that I actually felt comfortable and like I could discuss like what, like basically that I really didn't know, like I felt God, but I really had no idea how to talk about it with other people. Like there wasn't necessarily a shared language that I was a part of.
That makes so much sense. That being caught between like, too religious for this environment, but not religious enough for this environment. And what do you do when you're in such a position? If somebody doesn't meet you there, if there's not a communal space that can say, actually, that's a really healthy and awesome place to be in. Let's grow together. Then of course you're going to feel like an imposter, right? Because you go over here and you're an imposter, and you go over here and you're an imposter. It's a lose-lose situation. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, I suppose the second question then, it feels like it's dying to be asked to the two of you, is, has anything helped you leave behind some or all of imposter syndrome? Elizabeth, let's start with you this time. Has anything helped you leave behind any imposter syndrome spiritually?
Leaving behind that community for sure helped me a lot, because I felt like I could not hear what God had for me because I was busy hearing their voices of what God had for me. And I never really fully realized how much God had for me until I came to BLC. And that there is a freedom in knowing that sometimes he meets me out in walking outdoors. And that is amazing. Or he meets me in my women's group. And diving deeper into the women's group, just hearing their honesty as well made me open up about being honest. And I think that's where God has met me the most, in seeing other people being vulnerable about their struggles with God, versus being previously in an environment where there were no struggles. God is good all the time. What do you mean? What are you talking about that you're feeling depressed or alone? I never had that honesty before. Everything was always great.
Honesty feels like the key thing that was in what we identified before, which is you had maybe some of the right messages or maybe some of the right ideas that were supposedly what you were pursuing, but in practice it never got there because it was missing honesty.
Exactly. I echo with that a lot. Yes, I did hear about God's goodness and him saying, come as you are. But I wanted to unpack that a little more. But come as you are meant sometimes I just had a really hard week. God, come meet me in that. And when I wanted to dive deeper, it felt like everybody else had a great week. And I could not dive any more into that topic. And I felt like isolated in a way, because the God I knew, I thought was supposed to be there, whether you were down or up or, just confused. And what I was receiving from others was there's never confusion or frustration or loneliness. So yes, absolutely.
You talked for a minute there at the start about some different practices that you tried, practices that from a background of a church that has evangelical roots. I know that that's your story. I know that that's many people in this church's story of more evangelical style teaching their entire life for instruction about what is spiritual growth. So you talked about trying some practices that aren't like the first ones that are recommended in those settings. And I remember you and I were talking earlier this week about other practices that were delivered to you a lot. You have to do this. You have to do this. This is actually the only way. And has there
Fasting.
been any fasting in particular? Tell me more. Why fasting?
To be closer to God, you have to fast from food, for example. And when I tried it, I felt like I was just hungry the whole time. I couldn't even concentrate on what God had to tell me because I was thinking of the next meal that I had to have. Not to say that fasting is bad, but I think it's finding what makes you feel connected to God the most. For me, fasting from technology or fasting from just the everyday of work and just being outdoors, to me, that is a connection to God. I think that is amazing for me. Just like for me, reading a really good book and seeing what message comes from that doesn't necessarily mean you don't read the Bible, but I feel like coupling that with another book that draws you to what God has to say, I think is great. You don't have to read 250 pages of the Bible every day to feel closer to God.
Yeah, I think that you're pointing out a really important nuance here is that there is a lot of fear in that drives a lot of the messaging in some religious settings that people experience, and this is why they give such rigid, specific instruction about this is what it means to connect with God, and it's this and we're not going to recommend anything else to you. You got to do this. And there's a lot of fear behind that because if we don't give extremely specific or very rigid instruction, then people might just fall off into whatever and never connect with God again. And then what will we do? And what I'm hearing you say is that like being released into the wild where you weren't listening to those fear-driven voices was not an experience of like falling away. It was an experience of becoming closer to God because you had more freedom to explore different things.
Exactly. There was one other thing that I remember that spewed into my home as well, where home in a way is where you want to feel most connected to God, and you get that example from your parents. Is I grew up having to listen to Christian music all day long. That is the only way you could connect to God. And I have found like listening to Neo Soul, Lauryn Hill, or things like that. There are some messages that I have found that I'm like, oh, I never thought about life in that perspective. And listening to it that way makes me drawn more to God. Or the other thing was being friends with non-Christians was a no-no. I grew up that you only had to be surrounded. And it felt like I was stuck in a bubble. And I felt like my most meaningful spiritual conversations were with people that were not in the same circle as me. And that flexed my spiritual muscle to think more about who God was. And he is so much bigger than what just being stuck in this inside this society of just super strict evangelical Christian.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that this reminds me of the conversation that our church had, I think like a month or two ago. We talked about letting experience guide how we learn about God, or how we pursue spiritual growth, and that can be a scandalous thing to hear for anybody who did come from that more evangelical infused experience, because in general, the only source of truth in evangelicalism is considered the Bible. And what we talked about is that there is a much more ancient tradition that doesn't just have one wheel on the ground. We called that the unicycle. Of like, read the Bible this way, and that's your only source of truth. But other people have talked about a tricycle as an image for understanding a broader way to let various things that make up who we are and how we form our identities lead us toward what is spiritual health for us. And I think what you're describing is you went from a unicycle to a tricycle, and and I think that's great. Like those are much more firm on the ground, right? Like letting one thinker that we'll quote a fair amount here, Richard Rohr, who writes a great deal about modern spirituality. He refers to the tricycle as three things. He'll say the Bible or scriptures, kind of your tradition, is one wheel that's on the ground. Another wheel that's on the ground is the community and tradition that you draw from. And so, the people around you, the people who've gone before you, and they have offered us invaluable things when we're trying to figure out like what is wisdom in this case, or what do I do in this case, or how might God be speaking into my life in this place. If we didn't have people around us or people before us to help us figure out what that is, we'd be out of luck. We're just relying on our own understanding. And then finally, the last wheel on the ground being experience, and that being an okay way for us to understand what is connection with God. That doesn't mean that we're like leaving other things behind, or that we're wanting to create a new unicycle that only has one wheel on the ground. It just means we're trying to fill out the balance a little bit better. And I just hear that all over your story, Elizabeth, that this sounds a lot healthier and freer than what you were experiencing before.
Absolutely.
That's cool.
I agree with that.
Abby, if we can jump over to you in terms of leaving imposter syndrome behind, feeling more balanced and not like you're a fraud all the time. What's helped you in that regard? Any practices or messages or anything like that?
Everything Elizabeth said. No, I was like really wanting to do this like connection thing that we do at school, because like a lot of what you were saying, Elizabeth, was really speaking to how I also feel of leaving that behind. And just what I was hearing you say, and something that I really feel too, is that that like I find God in like non-God places a lot, or I guess rather like God is in all places, is probably more the realization that you mentioned going outside, Elizabeth, and for me, like going outside, being out of my head, is a very quick and very like kind of consuming way for me to feel connected to God. It's I like walking. And I like, kind of realizing like, oh, I'm really small, but like in a good way. It's, I feel part of a community or part of the world around me. And it really invites like wonder and possibility and calm. And I think none of those things can coexist with imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And so
yes. Well
physically being out of that is really, really helpful. And just, what you're saying about honesty with other people. I've been so helped by like my share and pray group and my friendships in BLC and outside of BLC. There's so much truth that comes out when you share life with other people. And I think one of the truths that you learn very quickly once you decide to be authentic and have an authentic friendship is that nobody really knows what they're doing. And there isn't like the people who you think have it figured out don't. And I like knowing that actually, like, I don't find that destabilizing. I think it's very comforting. And that there's a lot of then like sharing, real sort of sharing that can happen. And that like, there's nothing that's necessarily put on by that. And I think it really highlights the ways that we are connected and we get by because of other people. And there's a lot of shared, just those shared relationships when you can actually, like Elizabeth, when you were saying like, it's hard when you say like, I had a really hard week and everyone's like, I'm fine. You can't really get to that deeper level, and that they're not fine. Like, that's the other thing. Like, that there's something else there. But when there's that, when you're just in community with other people and sharing daily life, like you realize really quickly that everybody is fine and nobody is fine. But like being able to talk about it, I think is very helpful. And then again, it gets you out of your own head. Like imposter syndrome for me, it's like, I don't need to be thinking about that all the time. And I'm not really thinking about it all the time either, but it's
background noise.
It's background noise. And there's so many other things that are more important and can get you closer to God and closer to other people. And I think like getting yourself out of those patterns by, sharing in community, for me, going outside, those types of things are very, very helpful. And I just was the song that you guys were singing this morning, that I was really resonating with the part that's like, more than words, more than good ideas. I found your love in the open fields. And it's like, I've heard that before. And for me, that's very like, oh yeah, like that's where I feel God, is when I'm just doing things, or when I'm just out, or when I'm living life, or realizing that I am connected to other people, to the environment.
I love that.
About me trying to be something for God.
Yeah, I love that. I think just like, I kind of want to take that a little bit further. One thing that I had written down, and I was like, what would be my response to this question? Like, what's helped me leave any sense of imposter syndrome behind? So like, sort of unsurprisingly from me, I would say like Jesus is really helpful on this front. But like, I actually really mean that. So like, I took I tried to make a list of Jesus's interactions with common people in the Gospels. So not like, like very important or super, religious elite or powerful people, but just like random people. And so here's a list of things that Jesus says to common people like us. You are not far from the kingdom of God, Jesus says to one person who asks him a question. The kingdom of God is within you, Jesus tells his disciples at one point. The secrets of the kingdom of God are revealed to you, he says to them in another moment. In another moment, Jesus talks about how it pleases God to reveal things to common folks rather than to important or powerful people. He says to a crowd, do not be afraid, little flock, for God is pleased to give you the kingdom. This is actually one of my favorite. In John 1, we actually did a prayer practice about this a little while ago. I think back in January. I find this one so beautiful. He says to Nathaniel, who had become one of his disciples, there's this moment of like him seeing really the best in Nathaniel, and Nathaniel kind of, the way we read the Gospels, he strikes you as like a cynical guy. And Jesus says to him, here is someone who is true, in whom there is no deceit. And I love that statement. And so I think for me, really early on in becoming a praying person, I internalized these Jesus interactions as like, this is God's attitude toward me. If there's any truth to this idea, Jesus shows us what the God of the universe is like. So that means that God's attitude is those kind of things. This like, so ready to show you things, so pleased to give you the kingdom of God, give you like, oh my God, God is all around me. That is to so like ready to see the best in you. And I can definitely raise my hand and say I am extremely lucky in that my own background, culturally, religiously, kind of set me up to not have baggage. And I've talked to this about many of you in this church before about like, so like I grew up with just the right amount of not very religious, that I didn't get any of ugly religion, but also just the right amount of like not anti-religious, that when I had a spiritual experience I couldn't explain, it was like, it made sense that I suddenly started going to church and became a praying person and figured out what that was. So I'm super lucky. And for many people, I don't think it's quite so simple. Like you just hear some Jesus statements and then you change the way that you operate. But I do think that we can make choices, even as no matter where we are, lucky or unlucky on that front. We can make choices now about like what messages we expose ourselves to, what cultures we actually spend time in now. And I do think it's really important that if you are going to listen to religious messaging, you listen to religious messaging that starts with the person and the character of Jesus, when it starts to tell you what God is like. And because if you don't start there, I do think that you're going to get a picture that is this scary God who's yelling at Elizabeth because she's not fasting and won't hang out with Abby because she doesn't know what to say when she prays. It's like that's ridiculous. Like we need to start with a better starting point. And so I'm grateful for the way that I was formed by like really early on. It was just like, hey, if you want to figure out what God is like, look at these interactions that Jesus has with people. One last thing I wanted to say, just along the lines, and I'd be curious to hear Elizabeth and Abby, how you would respond to this is, I think that like any relationship has virtuous cycles, right? Like if we're talking about like you have a good friendship and oh man, we had a really great time and that was cool. Yeah, I feel really good about this. Like it leads to the next thing, right? That's how friendship builds. And I've been thinking a lot about how, as we've been preparing for this, how when you guys shared with me ahead of time some of these things that you just shared with everybody, like these are things I've left behind. These are ways that I'm actually like finding myself, oh yeah, God, oh, this is I don't have to feel like I'm looking over my shoulder like I'm a fraud. I kept on thinking, aren't those virtuous cycles? Like, doesn't that lead to more? And I thought about how like, I don't know, like what do we risk if we assume that wherever we are right now, however much you're praying, even if the only time you're praying is here on Sunday at church because you're with a bunch of other people who are praying, or like in a small group with other people that pray, that you don't pray alone at all. What if that's where you are? But what if that actually really makes God happy and you let that be a virtuous cycle? Like, do we risk anything? I don't think we risk anything, right? Like that's got to go well. I don't know. How does that feel to you guys? Do we risk anything there, or does it feel like no, that absolutely would move me to the next phase? Or like, what am I missing here?
Gosh, there's so much freedom hearing that. I feel like all these shackles are broken off me. That man, sign me up for this, God, and that is just so liberating to hear that this is the God I serve. He is not rigid. He's meeting me where I'm at. Yes, whether I pray today or whether I pray, in a week from now, I want to serve him more in that way. And there is no, the God that I know is not this structured person, and I want to know him more. I want to know this person. That's how I feel. Yeah, I like that. I feel like using phrases like just as simple as like I want to, right? Like that that is attractive to me. That changes it, right? Like I like if we're talking about building relationship with God, but the only thing that ever is encouraging us to do that is, a stick that's whipping us, do more of this or be more like this, fit in more. I'm just not sure that's how relationship actually works with anyone, let alone God. Mm-hmm. Abby, I don't know was there anything else like that you'd pick out that just stands out as we're talking about this topic?
Yeah. And I think that it's interesting, like that you were talking about the cycle of it, because at first I was like, but then that still means that I'm like being complacent and I'm not like leaving room for growth. But I don't really, that was my first reaction, but I don't really, again, think that to a certain extent. Like, I think what really strikes me with what you're saying is, God's meeting us where we are and we're accepting that for now. And then as we're connecting with God in those ways, if it's like once a week, twice a week, whatever, in those kind of pockets that we have and things that make us feel connected to God, that eventually grows because your relationship grows. So it's not like, I'm doing this step, so then, I'll make it to the next step. It's sort of an acceptance of where you are and inviting God into that, and then seeing sort of how that grows and where that goes with that. And so I do like that and feel like that, that is how relationships in general build. And so it feels very, that it makes a lot of sense to me, and also feels like low pressure, which is good.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Oh, please, Elizabeth.
I was going to say, I see God less as a punitive person. And that's what relationship is supposed to be. If I grew up in a culture that was very corporal punishment-y, in my, and that's how God, I saw him as, and there was no room to ask or question or doubt and I feel like the God I know now meets me more when I say, I honestly don't know, or I'm doubting right now. And he's like, okay, I got you. Let me sit down with you and see you where you're at. Where can I meet you in your doubt? Let me show you. I want to show you. And he is this very embracing, compassionate person that I see now.
Do you know, just I think we kind of need to bring this to Elena just for time's sake. I'm so grateful to you guys offering all of this. I think the final thought I'm coming away with just is as you guys are both saying what you just said, and then I'm reaching back to grab what you said earlier, Elizabeth, about the ability to find God even in like when you're honest, even when things are rotten, you can still find there's some sort of like unlimited presence that God is still accessible there. And I wonder if one of the great like reasons we've had such like slightly off teachings and instructions about this is how to connect with God. Maybe the reason we've had like the risk that is often felt in those situations, the reason you resort to fear is because you're afraid like, well, we'll just go and look for whatever makes us feel good or feel happy. But what I hear and what you guys are saying, as I'm thinking about, like, we're talking about God being present to us in the worst of things and not just in the best of things. That doesn't at all feel like it's like you're just searching for like what's going to make you feel good. It sounds like you're searching for something, again, to bring this back to like Jesus shows us what God is like. The pinnacle of Jesus's life is suffering. It's not some triumph, right? And so there is this, I just think that fear that if we follow what we follow in any relationship, we might go, we might end up in a bad path with God because we've got to remember sometimes we've got to rough it with God. I just don't believe that. I don't believe it. Like I feel like if we follow what intuitively feels right with us in any relationship, with our relationship with God, that absolutely is going to guide us towards something that is bigger than us. And it's not just us looking to feel good or feel happy and throw away what like I'm hearing more honesty, not less honesty here.
Exactly.
Well, I suppose maybe the last thing I'll say is like is there a final encouragement, if you could boil it down to like a sentence or a paragraph that you would encourage our community, Abby or Elizabeth, what would you say?
Not great with the parting words, but let's see.
I put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think that what I feel like is one of the bigger things is what we were talking about with just like accepting that you are enough how you are with God. Yes. And God sees that. And so whatever way that you connect with God right now is the right way to be connecting with God. And that like you find God in places I think that you don't expect or are not traditionally religious, for me at least.
Awesome. Elizabeth, how about you?
I guess that you break down that imposter syndrome if you are just honest with where you are at, and that God will meet you in that honesty. He is not going to turn the other way or look at you as someone that is not worthy of him if you're just not transparent.
Very good. And I suppose my parting thought would just be to think about the best relationships in your life when you think about building relationship with God. You don't feel like a fraud with the people you feel closest to for all of the things that Elizabeth and Abby were just highlighting for. And I don't think that that's how it works with God either. Well, this was great. Abby, Elizabeth, we are so grateful. Thank you for like taking some time to think about this stuff and giving us your Sunday mornings. This was really, really great. Let me pray for us, if I could, for all of us. I did, I pulled a poem for us that I'm going to pray over us. This is a 14th century poem that I love because it tears down spiritual imposter syndrome in a way that is very playful. So this poem from the 14th century is called "We Might Have to Medicate You." Let me read it for you. Resist your temptation to lie by speaking of separation from God. Otherwise, we might have to medicate you. In the ocean, a lot goes on beneath your eyes. Listen, they have clinics there too for the insane who persist in saying things like, "I am independent from the sea." I want to read that one more time. Resist your temptation to lie by speaking of separation from God. Otherwise, we might have to medicate you. In the ocean, a lot goes on beneath your eyes. Listen, they have clinics there too for the insane who persist in saying things like, "I am independent from the sea." And as I pray, God, I love that poem. I love that. Like, what if the insane position is to believe that we are not connected with God, that God is not all around us and in all things? What if that's the crazy thing? And I want us to feel that level of freedom that we're exploring today. And I want us to feel that when we come to you, we can come to you honestly and fully and expecting you to respond to us the way Jesus responds to people. Not that we have to come to you like apologizing for what a fraud we are. We get nowhere when every prayer begins with apologizing for what a fraud we are. And so I just pray that you would encourage each of us now. Encourage each of us to just leave behind all of the apologies for what a fraud we are, and instead to rest in, as best we can, a belief that there is a God who loves us and cares for us, who treats us the way Jesus treats people, who does have more for us, who doesn't want us to get complacent, who does want us to grow and take next steps, but who does so in loving relationship with us. And so we just receive that. We receive that in any place that we felt shame in the past. And for anyone here who is like kind of like recognizing in their heart there is like some shame that's being raked up right now in this moment as Vince is praying, I pray your healing over that right now. God, you are a God that heals and shapes us and transforms us and brings us into new experiences of belonging and movement. And perhaps this is such a moment for anyone who's feeling that right now. So bring healing to these areas of shame. And may all of us feel this week nothing like frauds, and instead like people who are loved by the God of the universe. In your name, amen. Amen. Well, so good. This was great. Again, thank you very much to Abby and Elizabeth. We're giving you like the virtual round of applause here. We appreciate you all. Hey, we're going to be together in person in a couple of weeks. Those of you who are with us and join us from Chicago. So we'll actually get to hear applause. Won't that be cool? That will feel different. Yeah, I've been in spaces now with small groups of people, but I don't think I've heard applause yet. So that'll be a new one for me post-pandemic. So we do have two headlines for you this week. announcement wise before we close up. Haley Larson, our pastoral intern, is going to lead us in communion as we finish today. But I did want to put just a couple things on your radar. First off, this idea that we are meeting together for our local community June 27th. So that is not next Sunday, but it's the following Sunday. That service will be a hybrid service. That's the phrase we're going to use going forward for our joint in-person and online offerings, a hybrid service. So anybody who would like to meet online, you totally can. Obviously, if you're not local to Chicago, that's your window into our services, and that will still be offered. We're excited about this. It's going to be a little bit like we're going to be trying a lot of new things. So the seams may be slightly more visible between things as we're learning how to sew everything together. We're going to take our summer hybrid services as sort of practice services for us to learn how to do this in a time where it's still not quite safe enough for us to like invite the whole neighborhood back to church. But as we move toward that, we want to learn what does it look like for us to do this. So if you are comfortable and you want to meet in person, we would so love to see you on June 27th at the Davis Theater, 10 a.m. Central Time. For anybody who is local, if you did not participate in our survey yet, I'm going to have Abby drop the survey, the link to our survey in the chat right now. This is to let us know your comfort level about various things so that we have the right restrictions and regulations in place for our in-person service on June 27th. My second headline announcement is that next Saturday is Juneteenth. Juneteenth marks the day 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, when enslaved Black Americans in Texas finally actually were freed. It is both a celebration of freedom for Black Americans and also a recognition that freedom is often delayed for Black Americans. And it's really come to the forefront in the last couple of years, particularly with the events of last summer. And that's important. I think that there are a lot more things happening that draw attention to the fact that Juneteenth is an important celebration that we should mark. Our friends at Brownline with the Black Abolitionist Network are hosting a big celebration block party next Saturday to kick off another year of them campaigning for reimagining public safety in Chicago, defunding the Chicago Police Department and reallocating those funds towards social services and violence prevention. Their block party, we're going to drop details in it. It is meant to be a primarily Black event. So Black folks in our church, if you're interested, you can follow the link there that Abby is dropping in the chat right now to get the details for if you want to participate, if you want to go and join the celebration. Non-Black folks in our community, there are still ways to support the celebration, and the campaign is asking for that. So they would love help. First off, BLC is renting 35 tables for the event. So we're going to be providing that as a church. That's our contribution to the Juneteenth celebration. You can donate to our neighboring fund if you want to back that donation. So at any point you can go to brownlinechurch.org/donate and do that. Also, the organizers are looking for childcare during the celebration and would love anyone's help for that. And so if you are interested in helping with that, there are different shifts throughout the day because it's supposed to be like a block party for the whole day. For next Saturday, if you're interested in helping with that, you can email me. It's on the south side of Chicago, or you can private chat me in Zoom here, and I'll make sure to follow up with you about that. Okay, those are my announcements. If you are newer with us or you're not sure that we have your contact information, you can follow our Connect card link. If you're curious about other resources to get connected with a small group or to learn more about our church, you can follow our resources link. And finally, you can donate, as I mentioned, because we are a crowd-funded church here at the link brownlinechurch.org/donate. Thank you so much, as we say every week, to those who give in either one-time capacities or in recurring gifts that help us to plan and budget. We are so grateful. That's what allows us to do ministry here, is have people on staff, is your donations. Let me close there and hand over the microphone to Pastor Haley Larson, who will close us for today.
Hi, everyone. So each week we close our time together with the practice of communion. Followers of Jesus have come to the table together across time and space using different elements to remember Jesus' blood shed and body broken. And so today we come together from our own spaces to take part in this practice together. If you'd like to participate, I'd encourage you to go find your own food and drink to use. I've got some toast and iced coffee left over from breakfast. And if you're comfortable doing so, I'd also encourage you to turn on your camera so that we can see more of our community gathered this morning. So communion is a chance for us to remember individually and communally that we are in need of the grace and compassion found in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. In communion, we acknowledge this dependence on God. We are dependent on the unfathomable abundance of a God of more, a God who delights in us. So on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he broke bread, gave thanks, and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Whenever you do this, do so in remembrance of me." Likewise, he took the cup and said, "This is my blood poured out for you. Whenever you do so, do this in remembrance of me." So let's pray. God, we turn to you in our full and honest selves. When we do not have the words to say, when we feel inadequate or shame, may we learn to rest in your goodness. I'm grateful that you are one who offers us a sense of belonging and healing and love. So may we walk in these ways as well, offering one another belonging, healing, and love. In the places and community where we experience you most, may we continue to find sustaining hope. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Haley. And another special thanks to Elizabeth and Abby for leading our discussion today. Great to be with you all, and we will see you guys next Sunday. Bible group is off for this week, but then I believe kicks back up next week. So if you're hanging around for that, you'll hang on until next week. We'll see you all soon.